Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sai here today to discuss with you our brand new topic, which is Stuart's Britain, particularly Charles I and the Stuart Monarchy. And in this module, we're going to be exploring the entirety of Charles I's reign, ranging all the way from his beginning in 1625 and all the way up to the English Civil War era when we get to the 1640s. It's important to preface this video series, as always, by knowing this is content for the A-level student, so of course it will have some key content and knowledge throughout to help you with your examination studies. With all that said, notepads and pens, and let's begin. In this video, I want to give you an overview now of the background to 1625 and of course inform you about the general trends we're going to see as we go throughout British society, what exactly was contained within it, what's it all about, and especially how it can link to your studies and help improve your history studies as we go forward in this academic term. So before we even get into 1625, it's important to understand the background information that is happening before this time begins. So we need to understand exactly how is Britain structured in 1625, particularly what nations are involved in it, and again the places that make up Britain in the 1620s. We also need to understand Britain's political system as well, because it's a fair bit different to how it is in our modern context today. And of course, as always, we need to understand the political system so we can understand the key facets of British society and how exactly everything was functioning. The third part is actually religion. We're going to be focusing on religion within this topic. I'm going to be planning on doing a separate video series alongside our content to help you understand what exactly we're going to be containing in our studies. And especially with religion, it's important to understand that unlike our society today, where a lot of people are secular or they're atheists and they don't necessarily have lots of religious beliefs, back then religious beliefs were quite fundamental to how millions of people, not just in Britain, but in the world, lived their lives. And so it's important that we understand what those religions were, and particularly the differences between those religions and the impact that it had upon Britain and British society. And the fourth and final point we're going to be exploring is James I's legacy for Charles I. So James I was Charles's father. So James was the predecessor to Charles I, and he was the first Scottish king to unite the nation. We're going to see that that's actually quite an important thing in British society to have a Scottish king who actually rules not just Scotland but the rest of the kingdom as well. And he leaves a significant legacy behind for his son Charles as an impact on society as time goes forward. So I have a map here that shows the kingdoms of Britain at this time. Now, the main distinctions I want to really point out for you all is we still have our four main kingdoms, which are England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. But unlike in our modern context, Ireland is not yet fractured in two yet. It is still one entire geographic landmass that is attached to the rest of the United Kingdom. And so the three distinctions we're going to have here are these nations differ on religious grounds, political grounds, and also their general history and ethnic origins. As our studies go forward, we're going to see this has a significant impact on how places are ruled. You heard me mention before how James was the first Scottish king to rule over England. And so that is a major talking point here. It's a major thing that's going to have impact on the studies. Because James, by being from Scotland, and Charles now ruling in England as well creates a lot of change because Charles doesn't have the same appreciation for Scotland that his father did, and that's going to really play a big role in our studies going forward. So make sure you're very familiar on these kingdoms because they're going to be playing a wider role in our studies about Britain as we roll on. Now, I mentioned religion as well, and there's clear religious division in British society at this time. Now, as I said before, unlike in our modern context, back in the 1500s and early 1600s, religion was central to life for all people who lived at this time. Again, to not have a religious belief was seen as quite unorthodox. Some would say quite radical at this time as well. Now, Catholicism used to be the dominant religion, but the Protestant Reformation that happened under Henry VIII split Britain from the Catholic Church, which really divided the nation. By splitting from the Catholic Church and forming the Anglican Church instead through his Protestant Reformation, he was able to use the creed and allow himself to get divorced. And so this one act from Henry massively split the nation going forward. No longer was England going to be central to European life where Catholicism was deeply present in especially Catholic countries like Italy and France. It was now going to be separated and of course doing its own thing as a nation instead. Time passed and Henry VIII died, and there was a lot of changes with Edward and Mary, two of the monarchs that took over before this person here, Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I was the first one to believe in what's called a compromise. She saw all the divisions that were happening between Protestants and Catholics. There was massive arguments about how faith should be followed, about how church masses should be held, about who was worshipping God in the correct way. And so she divides the Anglican Church as a way to compromise between what the Protestants wanted and what the Catholics wanted. We'll go into much more detail about what these differences were and how they, of course, caused this split in a later video. But the main one to be aware of now is that the Puritans rose up and they wanted an even more Protestant church. They wanted everything to be around the Bible, the Word of God, focused upon that instead, which is very different to how Catholics believe in worship in a much more higher state. But this compromise Elizabeth set up was going to last for the remainder of her time in power and pass on to James I when he came over from Scotland to rule in her stead. There are other variants as well, namely the High Anglicans, Arminians, and these are the ones who stand in sharp contrast towards the Puritans, but again, not quite the same as Catholics as we'd had during the union with the Catholic Church before the Reformation. So do bear this in mind. This is just an overview currently, a bit of background detail. We will go over in more detail about this in a future video, but it's good to have a bit of a foundation already about what happened in the Tudor times before we get into the Stuart era. The next point is about how English society was structured in the 1600s. Now, in this time, there are various different parts to what we call British society. The main ones that we're going to look at are first the monarch itself. The monarch was the absolute top of society, whether it was a king or a queen, the monarch was the one with all what's called prerogative powers. This meant that they had exclusive powers that only they, as the monarch, could actually have access to. This included things such as control of a foreign policy, the religious policy the country would have to follow, and summoning or dissolving parliament. So, quite literally, with foreign policy, they could decide where nations were going to be invaded, who they were going to fight against. With religious policy touching upon the Protestant Reformation, it gave monarchs like Henry VIII the power to break away from churches, form their own churches and way of faith. Again, whether it can be seen for their own selfish reason, but the impact of this change was that it's going to improve society because the word of the monarch was seen as the word of God on earth at this time. They, of course, had all the power to control and devour as time went on. And the last one is summoning or dissolving Parliament. We'll say more about what a Parliament is shortly. But a Parliament is essentially where, at this time, lords and what's called members of Parliament would meet up, most from the gentry class, and they would be chosen to, of course, lead and assist on policy and try and give approval for what the monarch wanted, and of course, voice what they wanted for the people. Because again, the nation is not just one person. While the king or the queen makes all the decisions. Again, these people in Parliament, they're the ones who are coming here and trying to have some say and make sure what is being done reflects the interests of the people. In some ways, it was the move first towards democracy that, of course, Britain still has today. The monarch would then delegate his power to what's called his Privy Council. These were a group of personally chosen advisors, but they were quite powerful people as well. Again, because they were so close to the king, in some ways they were borrowing his prerogative power to do what they like. So again, as an example, you have the monarch who's in control of foreign policy. They would then choose the individuals who are going to lead the foreign policy campaign that they wanted. So if they wanted to go and invade a different country, let's say Spain or France, they would choose someone who would then lead that and commit that going forward. This was the same with the religious policy. They would select someone who was going to then lead the religion policy, whether that's passing the Anglican Church or something else. And so it's important to bear that in mind. The monarch is giving power to people. All the power is being drawn from them and who they are, not necessarily coming from who people are as individuals. And speaking of power, we also have the royal court. These are the ones who contain all those who are surrounding the monarch and are consequently the richest people in the country. In this time, it wasn't just anyone who could be elected, you had to have a sign of strength. And at this point, a sign of strength was seen as purely economical. If you had lots of land, if you had, like in the gentry class, lots of estates to control and own, then you had lots of wealth and could then pass that on to be used instead. And so they were seen as some of the richest people in the country and therefore some of the most powerful because through their wealth, they could influence people to do what they wanted. So again, like on a farm, if they needed lots of farms to be tended to or houses to be built, then they could use their money, use their wealth to get people to do it for them. And again, that was seen as in the chain of being for how at the top the monarch would have power, goes into the Privy Council, into the Royal Court, and then passed on through the wealth throughout the rest of society. Parliament, as I said, has two key parts. They have the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and they pass the statute laws that the King and Parliament are passing together. And that's the thing, it's a relationship. Or Queen at the time be using their power to control things in society, while Parliament are working with the monarch to make sure that what's being passed is in the best interest of the people. And so, because of that, it's important to really understand that it's a working relationship. You can't have Parliament without the King, and you can't have King without Parliament. And those two things, they have to get along. So, the relationship between the two is so, so important, making sure things are successful. The next point is then the church. The church, of course, takes on all the religious authority that is passed on from the monarch, and it's their job to pass that out throughout society. One way they do this is, of course, providing news. They're the ones making the newspapers, making the pamphlets that are being passed out for all society. They provide the education, so we don't have a state education system like we do today. Education back then was created from the royalty, from the religious policies. And so very much a lot of it's centered around religion, learning Bible, learning the Gospels, and then understanding the Word of God to then use in wider society. And from this, the church had control of what were called parishes across the nation. So these were groups of people in their towns and in their villages who would meet up in the church in what's called a congregation. They would worship in the church, and then the church's knowledge would then be passed on to them through worship. And so from that, everything is connected. So religion is coming from the monarch, and it passed through the chain of being into the church. The church is going into the parishes spread throughout the country, so everyone theoretically has a shared social and cultural view of how society is run that all stems from how the king or the queen has deemed they should be following in society. And so then generally, British society contains the gentry, the merchant and labour classes. All of them are subservient to the monarchs. They're the ones who, of course, follow and do labour in society. They'll be seen equivalent to our ordinary people today, the ones who have a working job. They go out, get their money, get their land, go home and work to feed a family. That's their life. The ordinary people in society, less fixated about the monarchy and people at the top. Last thing to note as well is the rights of these people, as you may have gathered, are not necessarily equal. It's clear the monarchy has a lot of power, religion shares a lot of that power, and the people are then subservient to that power as well. They follow what's being said to them and follow what's being shared. The labour classes were not allowed to vote. As I said earlier, it's the richest people in society who get access to things like the House of Lords, House of Commons, and the Privy and Royal Courts. And so it's important we remember that. A lot of people in society don't have the same rights democratically that we have today. So a very, very top down society, how things are being run here, not necessarily equal. And so, a quick summary to make sure we've understood that is there are three key parts to this political system. So, that's all the classes that are in British society. These three things make up that political system, and how they are all very connected. So, the monarchy, at the time James and soon to be Charles I, they have all the power. It's top down from them. They decide what the policy should be and select those who are going to enact that policy. The second strongest is the church. Religion, again, is central to people's everyday lives at this time. So it's only from religion that they can gain any power and understand how the world works. A lot of it was coming from the church, and what their parish priests were saying to them is how they were going to perceive and view the world. So that education gave them a lot of influence over people in society. And the third one is Parliament. That's about wealth. What the wealthiest in society are the ones who get access to Parliament, and so they're the ones who then get a lot of control through the gentry system. And so that's the three clear things for us class to understand is that the monarchy has a lot of power that's believed to be coming from God, the divine right of being. We then have a lot of power in religion, which the church get, and a lot of power in money, which the parliament get. So the three things to be aware of as we go forward. The next part is to understand the legacy of James I. So this is the situation now. We've got the general cultural and social background about British society, but these are now the actual events that Charles I inherits from what his father James did before him. As I said earlier at the start of the video, James I was a Scottish monarch and he united Scotland and England's monarchies after the death of Elizabeth I. And that's a major thing that happens in British society. Again, this sense of union between the two that is coming from the monarchies. But this doesn't necessarily mean the two countries become identical. They start to have a shared culture or social life. They don't. They're still very different in how people in them perceive the world and how they behave. And again, religion is going to be the catalyst for how that's going to be presented to us. By the 1620s, something called the 30 Years' War was occurring. This essentially pitted the Protestant nations against all the Catholic ones. There was a massive falling out over religion and religious differences, and so these two types of churches were the ones mostly at war with each other. Interestingly, James was quite peaceful. He didn't really want to fight in the war and worked a lot in his time to prevent that from happening. He closed Parliament a few times, using his royal prerogative to dissolve them. I wanted to stay out of these affairs that were happening in the wider world. And while this may be seen as a good thing, to be quite peaceful and quite caring and not wanting to send people out to die for a cause they may not necessarily fully support, this did mean religious division in England became unresolved. Again, more views started to spring up, Arminian and Puritan views especially, which really came into conflict with each other. And so James's efforts did not fully address these problems, and so basically his legacy was one of unresolved tension that Charles was going to have to inherit. James also had a very mixed relation with Parliament. As said, he dissolved them a few times, and again, his desires for peace went against his desires of the Church of England to fight against the Catholic nations instead. He also, when James dies in 1625, leaves someone behind who Charles I inherits, and that man is George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. So you may have heard me mention before about the Privy Council and the royal court. Essentially, the monarchies at this time would have what they would call favourites. So it'd be a single individual that they selected to be their personal partner. There's lots of historical interpretations about how these favourites were used. Some say they just were the key advisor for the king. They would advise them what to do. They would tell them how to run the country and give their view on matters that maybe the king or queen did not necessarily understand. The other view of favourites is they also provided personal favours towards the monarch as well. So the favourites had access to the royal bedchamber, which is George Villiers was the last favourite who had a lot of influence over the king. And so the two of them got along quite well. The relationship the two had, again, is up for interpretation. George Villiers and James Percy did write to each other, and they had a lot of what some would say maybe erotic conversation in how they interacted with each other. There's variations on this. Some say it's just playful banter or wordplay. Some say there was some genuine signs of a sexual or personal relationship between the two. Regardless of our interpretation of that, it's important to understand George Villiers, by virtue of his relationship with James, inherited a lot of power through him. And so now James has died, he's going to expect that same kind of influence over Charles as well. And we're going to see the pair already knew each other before James died as well. And again, through that relationship, George is the one who holds a lot of influence and sway in society as the young novice in Charles ascends to the throne. So let's bring it all together. Let's summarize the situation that Charles I inherits by 1625. He becomes king during a time of war, the 30 Years' War in particular. And so, because of that, religious division is very, very prevalent in British society at this time. Anti Catholic feeling is extremely high, and Protestant England is making it very clear how it wants to stand in this society at this time, away from the Catholic Church and wanting to be its own thing, despite all the various divisions and denominations there within. The Duke of Buckingham has arranged for Charles to marry someone called Henrietta Maria. She is a Catholic who is the sister to the French king. And this is quite controversial at this time. Buckingham is doing this as a way to, of course, bring union between the Protestant and Catholic churches. But again, as we just said, the church has been Anglican now since the mid 1500s. So again, this is a massive change here to try and insist that they go back towards Catholicism. And we're going to see that that's going to have a big impact as time's going to go on. Money, the financial situation in this country is quite low as well. They've been fighting in this war, again, not just now, but earlier ones as well. It's quite costly, quite attritional. And so finances are in a dire state. England is not a rich, thriving empire at this time. It's quite poor. And so it's really going to struggle with its population boom and population decline as things go on. And finally, I think the biggest thing to take away from this background video is just how important religion is at this time. Again, it's the biggest difference we can see in society right now. A lot of people are religious, a lot of people turn to God for their answers, or at least turn to the parish and the churches for some sort of solution. Again, there's no real idea of rationalizing things or using science. Again, these are quite novel ideas at the time, and so religion is seen as the one bridge or gateway to try and understand what is happening in the world. And so, because of those divisions, they're, as we say, clear sign of uncertainty that Charles inherits. And there we are, class. I hope you found this video quite informative and quite useful. This is just the background, as I say, into the key information we're exploring now at this time. So do bear that in mind. Everything we've mentioned here is going to be explained in much more detail as we go forward, and there's going to be specialist videos on certain content as well as we go through it. Do let me know how you found this video in the comments below. Your feedback, as always, is deeply appreciated. And what are you most looking forward to about this topic? Again, what stands out to you? What interests you most here? Is it the wars? Is it the monarchy? Is it the political system? Is it the use of favourites? Is it the financial situation? Or maybe is indeed the religious division that is quite prevalent at society at this time? Thank you for watching. This has been History with Sire, and thank you for listening.